The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Now, in Sri Lanka, remittances from overseas migrant workers are the second largest source of foreign exchange earnings. The Middle East is currently the largest foreign employment market for Sri Lankan migrants. Mainly, this consists of low-skilled migrant workers and female domestic workers. All of these come with their own key challenges: separation of families, children being left behind. We'll get into more of the details during the discussion. But with the pandemic, something that happened was that the traditional world of work shifted. Similarly, recruitment dynamics also shifted. What are the key challenges? What is this changing face of labour migration? That'll be the topic of discussion tonight. I'm so pleased to welcome back to the show Dr. Bilesha Weeraratne, Research Fellow, Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. Good evening and welcome to the show, Bilesha.
Good evening. Thank you, and it's lovely to be back.
With the pandemic, the traditional conception of work as well as the traditional conception of recruitment drastically shifted. Take us through the impact that this has had on Sri Lankan migrant workers, especially from a point of view of vulnerability and desperation due to the socio-economic vulnerabilities that it has created.
Yes, Sonali. Normally, before the pandemic, mainly recruitment for labour migration was formally through recruitment agents regulated by the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. But with the pandemic, as you correctly said, the world of work changed. Along with that, the recruitment dynamics also changed, where people were recruited via a lot of informal networks through their family and friends contact. That's sort of a new modality where recruitment agents are slowly taking a backstage. Now, the importance of formal recruitment agents was going down even before the pandemic, but now we have seen that there is a big push for these informal networks for recruitment to come to the forefront, because on the one hand, the pull factors in the countries of destination have changed, where the countries of destination are very keen to have a larger pool of migrant workers to pick from when they are recruiting. So because of that, many countries like, for example, Oman or the UAE have introduced some visit visa schemes where potential migrant workers could go to those countries as a visitor,
right,
and test the waters and look for a job over there. Previously, these were not so much encouraged. There were mechanisms, but this was not mainstream. But now it is becoming a lot mainstream. So along with this sort of pull factors and the push factors back at home, where there is economic issues and there is more interest in going abroad for foreign employment, people can use their personal networks, their family and friends, and look for jobs overseas. So the recruitment dynamics have changed a lot in the post-pandemic situation for labour migration.
Okay. Speak to us about how this increases the vulnerability.
Yes. So now when a recruitment agent is licensed and regulated by the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, there is a lot of responsibility for the recruitment agent towards the recruitment process of the potential migrant worker, as well as the well-being during the in-service period. But when it is an informal network, now there are various types of these informal networks. You might go through your friend or your family contact, but then it goes a little further and you might go through a friend's friend contact.
Okay.
Then you might not know much about this recruitment modality, whether this person can be trusted. And then there are so many online advertisements going on, and people might call up and meet up or contact one of these informal networks to find employment, and then there is no regulation. There is no guarantee that you can contact this person throughout your migration cycle. The person is highly likely to disappear after sending you abroad. So that is where the vulnerability comes, because there is very little information about who sent you abroad and whether they can ensure that you are getting a good job, whether it's a comfortable and a secure job, whether it will be the same throughout your contract period, or whether you will have a contract to begin with. But again, if you go with a known friend or a family, there is a little bit more, the level of comfortableness is a little more than going through a formal agent, because you know the person. The person will tell some personal experience that this is a nice family, this is a nice working environment, and I am also there, so you will be a little bit more relaxed and ready to take up that job. So there are so many dynamics when it comes to vulnerability. But if you are engaging with a very informal person that you don't have any references and there is no way of checking or tracking that person, the potential to be vulnerable for various abusers during the recruitment process or during the service period, or vulnerabilities or exploitation or wage theft or debt bondage. There is so many issues that can come up if you look into these informal networks, that there has little binding afterwards.
When we speak about job recruitment modalities having shifted and changed, this has also opened the floodgates for scammers, for trafficking. And we saw this taking place in Myanmar, as carried by news reports in Sri Lanka. I mean, super scary stuff. Talk to us about this dynamic as well.
Exactly. So when the situation back at home is not so pleasant and one is very desperate to find an income source and desperate to go abroad for a job, and you see a nice advertisement saying that this is a very high paying job and regular working hours, there are perks, and the online advertisement can be very impressive and very attractive, and people are very likely to be duped by such advertisements, and they might not cross check about the validity of it, and they might pay for their recruitment process. But then there are some such advertisements where they might pay an incentive in advance for you to take up the job. Right. And it looks very rosy when you look at it from the outside. But once you go, you don't know how it happens and what happens, and then there is little accountability, because the recruitment person, the agent or whoever that you spoke to, keeps changing. In Sri Lanka, it's one person, and then the hands change when you go to another country. And especially in the East Asian region, there are very strong and powerful networks going on, and you are changed hands and you don't know who's responsible for you. If you try to leave those networks, it's very difficult to leave, and they will kind of put you in a debt bondage situation, saying that you have to pay for the recruitment, you have to pay for the cost that is incurred into bringing you here. Until and unless that is paid, we will not release you. And then there is other areas where they will get you to work excessive hours, and then there is you're forced to do online criminality against your will, and because you're in this traffic sort of a situation, you cannot get out of it easily, and it's so difficult, especially when you're in another country. Imagine your passport is taken and you're nobody there, and how can you go and ask for help? And there is no way of going out there in sort of camp sort of situations. So it becomes highly risky and highly vulnerable. That's why it's very important to cross-check and understand what sort of employment opportunity it is and how valid it is, and don't get carried away by the offers given, because most often some things are too good to be true.
Sure.
You have to be careful.
At the core of these exploitative tactics are the exploitation of a person's hunger, the socioeconomic hardship and vulnerability. My question to you is, Bilesha, why are we so gullible? Why are we so ill-equipped in terms of knowledge? Shouldn't the state be telling us what is what? Where are we going wrong, as in terms of the knowledge deficit? I
think the fundamental thing is, when you're hungry, when you don't have a job, you're just desperate to get what you want.
Yeah.
Pumped up a little bit more so that people are understanding the risks a little bit more, and also the timing of the information is very important.
Right.
Pointless giving it once they have made the decision. It's ideal if you can give it before they make the decision. Look at some viable options in Sri Lanka. Look at some viable foreign employment options that can be taken up in a more regular, less risky way, and understand the different risk factors, so that timing is important, and the content has to be relatable to the person. It is sometimes when you give information in a very technical manner or very manner in that covers the entire population of potential migrant workers, it might not feed into the lower skilled migrant workers.
So that's basic psychology, right? And you'd expect state institutions who are tasked with this role of creating awareness to know that.
They are aware of it. They're doing their best. I think now the situation has changed a lot because everything has changed. Earlier we were kind of thinking of bringing people back and reintegrating. Now you have to bring them back. Along with reintegration, there's a remigration option. So when the reintegration is hard, the remigration push is hard. So there's a lot of dynamics going on, and the country situation is also not helpful. So it's too much to take on, I think. But there is a lot more that can be done.
All right. We are in conversation with Dr. Bilesha Weeraratne. We go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
එට අපේ පළවෙනි හෝලි උත්සවය. ඔයාගෙන්ගේ මුලින්ම පාට ගන්නේ මම.
අද මේ හෝලි දවසේ මං ඔය කෙල්ලගේ ජීවිතේම අඳුරු ජීවිතයක් කරනවා.
බෑරෙත් සින්රාතෝර්. ඉම්ලි සේරටම කලින් මටයි අයිති වුණේ. ඔයාට කලින් මම යාගෙන්ගේ පාට ගන්නවා.
අද රාත්‍රී 9:30ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන් Shakti Crowd Shakti Crowd
සත්‍යයගේ රාත්‍රී 8:30ට ශක්ති TV තුලින්
ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ විදිහට අපි ගොඩද
මේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති රාමුවත් මේකත් හිස් වූ රාමුවක්
නායකෙක්ට පුළුවන් අවශ්‍යයි නම් සංවේදීත් වෙලා ඒ වෙලාවෙම තාර්කිකත් වෙන්න
ජානමය හේතුත් බලපාන්න පුළුවන් ද සමහර වෙලාවට මානසික තත්ත්ව වෙනස් වෙන්න
මානසික රෝගයක් 80%ක් ජානගතයි 20%ක් එන්වයරන්මන්ට් එකේ ඉන්නේ
නින්දේදිත් සිදුවෙන ශ්වසන අපහසුතාවන් පිළිබඳ අපිට වාර්තා වෙනවා මේක ගොරවනකොට වැඩි වෙනවද
නින්දේදී සිදුවන ශ්වසන විහෙරතාවය නැත්නම් මේක හඳුන්වනවා මේ ඔබ්ස්ට්‍රක්ටිව් ස්ලීප් ඇප්නියා කියන තත්ත්වය
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට
You know, if you are saying that someone conspired to get rid of you as president or whatever, you must have the hard evidence. The idea of putting this particular individual as chairman of this committee may well be to satisfy the SLPP or whatever. Need to know what these pieces of legislation are and how it impacts on their life.
I would say we have no preference. We are ready for any election.
Because the Pohutto fellows know that they can't stay with the Pohutto anymore because of what happened. We are a political party who listens to professionals and academics who know the subject.
That being said, he is still a mandateless leader.
Right.
I would have said that whoever assumed duties,
95% of their, income are going for the lease of the aircraft.
The government is trying to introduce, let's say, 40 new or 40 amended laws. That doesn't mean that we are developing in that area.
TV1 TV for life. Absence of parliamentarians scheduled to speak in Parliament stalls debate on the new Banking Amendment Bill. Bill passed without a proper debate. New proposals to limit the exorbitant profits earned through the sale of potatoes and onions. National People's Power challenges Sajith to an open debate with Anurakumara regarding economic policies. Cabinet not to lease for aircraft and import 1,000 new vehicles. World Bank report reveals 25.9% of Sri Lankans living below the poverty line in 2023. Sri Lanka on the brink of victory in the second test against Bangladesh.
And this time it's in the sun was fighting hard in
TV1 TV for life.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back. You're watching The People's Platform. We're discussing the changing face of labour migration with my guest, Dr. Bilesha Weeraratne, Research Fellow, Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. Bilesha, when we take overseas migrant workers, a majority of them consist of low-skilled migrant workers and female domestic workers who are increasingly vulnerable to human rights violations, labour rights breaches, abuse, harassment at the workplace. Now, the National Labour Migration Policy of Sri Lanka stated that new overseas markets and opportunities must be explored and promoted. The government needs to encourage skilled migrants. Where are we in that paradigm?
I think there is a lot of interest and effort taken in promoting skilled migration. Towards that, one thing that is happening is upskilling lower skilled migrant workers. If you're a female domestic worker, some training is given so that you can go as a housekeeping assistant or a domestic caregiver sort of a occupation where it's a little higher than the lower ranks of the skills distribution. But then there is also, while there is a promotion for higher skills to be sent out, I feel much of the migrant workers in the right end of the skills distribution are not captured in our data, because often it's the lower people in the lower end of the skills distribution that would register through the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment and go for foreign employment.
Right.
The people with more skill, more professional type of migrant workers will not bother to register with the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment because there's little for them to gain from that.
Sure.
You need to understand why would the law is there. You have to register if you're going for foreign employment.
Okay.
But if you look at it from a personal point of view of a migrant worker, why would I want to register? What is the big benefit for me? What is the gain? What is the hassle of going through the registration? And then it's like they find their own job through a personal contact, and what is the involvement of the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. So from that point of view, I think we are not capturing a lot of the skilled and the professional migration that is taking place, especially right now.
Okay.
So that is a concern that's going on, I think, and it's hard. You have to understand how to bring them into registering. There has to be some new ways of attracting them. And then you asked about new markets. Yes, new markets are being looked at and promoted in an encouraging way. But then also we have to understand when we are looking at new markets and promoting more skilled migration. Now Sri Lanka will need a critical mass of workers for the Sri Lankan domestic labour market. So we need to understand what sort of categories, what sort of occupations are needed back at home while we send a certain component of such occupations overseas. So right now I don't think we have a good understanding about what are the critical sectors or what are the critical occupations that we will need for a recovery process, because right now Sri Lanka is not economically thriving. So eventually we are going to need to recover. For that recovery process, who is needed back at home and how are we going to retain them? Can we send all of them out, and then what are we going to do? So those are some of the things that we need to understand when we are trying to promote skilled labour and finding new markets. And first and foremost, I think we need to understand what is the domestic demand for labour and then balance it with the global demand for labour or labour migration.
When we look at this from a resource allocation point of view, the Sri Lankan state expends a considerable sum of money educating individuals. So the country invests in them and then they are compelled to leave the country. For example, hundreds of nurses left Sri Lanka after the economic crisis, but they went for lower ranking jobs at a higher pay. So nurses went as caregivers. And speak to us about this dynamic where we invest in individuals, they go for lower ranking jobs at a higher pay, and from a personal point of view, that's fine, there's nothing wrong in that. What is the state missing out on?
Personal point of view also, Sonali, I think the person who's going is very myopic and not looking at the long term. Imagine a person who is a skilled nurse, trained nurse, going for a caregiver job abroad. Will she have consistent job satisfaction doing that job when she sees another person doing the skilled nurse's job?
Sure.
So in the short run, yes, she will earn a lot of money and compensate that feeling with that, but then long-term job satisfaction, occupational mobility, that sort of things will not be achieved. So it's important to understand and balance these. And you're correct, the state has invested heavily. Sri Lanka has a free education system, so we have invested a lot in human capital development, and when people leave, it's a loss, and there is no mechanism that Sri Lanka has can compensate for the human capital development that we have made in many of the sectors. There is a few areas where there is a bond or a way of recovering some part of the human capital investment, like for medical professionals. But I don't think the entire human capital investment is covered there. So from a personal point of view, it might make sense if I don't have enough money back at home to meet my economic needs for my family, then they might consider going. But then the larger picture, the macro picture, when we pump in a lot of money as free education, and are we supplying workers to another country? Is that what we want? But then we need to have a way of getting back some return on our investment, return on our human capital investment. How do we do it? There are many ways of other countries doing it. Have some critical period of employment that one has to work, or get them to pay up a bond, or get them to come back after a certain number of years, so that it's, I'm not saying that people have to be deprived of the opportunity to go abroad. If there's a right, they can go. But then we have to balance these rights against the country requirements also in a win-win way, not in a very harsh way where the person is penalized.
Absolutely. My final question to you is, now when we take these labour migration trends and the changing face of labour migration, what sort of strategies should the government use to maximize its positive impacts and minimize the drawbacks?
I think one critical area is right now, one of the major drawbacks is the vulnerability of migrant workers and the related costs that the government has to make or pay in terms of rectifying that vulnerability, maybe to bring back the person, to repatriate the person, or in some way. But why is it happening? Because most often a big chunk of migrant workers are not provided the required services by the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, because they are not registering with the Bureau of Foreign Employment. But they are migrant workers. They are sending remittances. The country is benefiting from their remittances. So there has to be a paradigm shift in looking at this, whether a migrant worker is a person who's registered with the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment and we give only services to them, or we kind of take a step back and look at it in a new way where we can give services, make them aware of the risks, make them aware of the benefits, and make them choose regular and legal pathways. So to do that, we have to not be set within this regulatory framework of the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, I believe. And I think the time is right, because the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment Act is under review. And right now what is happening is, because the registered migrant workers are paying a registration fee. The Bureau is run with the money collected from the registered migrant workers. So they have to, in return, provide services only to them. But there is a whole chunk of migrant workers going outside of the Bureau, sending remittances to the country, but they are not getting the protection or the services if they fall into trouble because they are not registered. So now this registration and services, that marriage has to be reconsidered, because that is where the problem is coming. If all can be provided support in some dynamic way, without looking at the traditional way, because the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment Act was drafted in 1985. As we started off, the world of work has changed. The world of recruitment for labor migration has changed. So can we operate within an act that was drafted in 1985, or is it time for us to look at it in a new way and think of covering all these new types of labor migrants, new types of recruitment for migrants, so that we can give them the protection and the support, and also the country can benefit from all of them regardless of whether they are registered or not, because irrespective of their registration status, we get the remittances from them, right? So then I think we have to start looking at a way of covering or providing support for them in a more broader sense without being boxed into this.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much, Dr. Bilesha Weeraratne, for sharing your perspectives and expertise. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.